The dog froze. Then he lunged. A silenced shot rang out as Max threw himself over the boy. Chaos erupted, and the judge, he went pale. Because he recognized the shooter and knew exactly why he was there. What happened next shook the entire courtroom. But let's start at the beginning. No one expected 10-year-old Josh Preston to speak. Not the bailiff, not the press, not even the bailiff's assistant, who paused mid-coffee sip the moment the boy stepped through the heavy oak doors, clutching the leash of a massive German shepherd with a crimson vest. And certainly not Judge Harold Garrison. Judge Garrison was infamous in this county. They called him the Gavel Ghost because, once he ruled, it was like his decisions were carved into granite. He was the kind of judge who didn't believe in emotion unless it was written into a statute. And if you cried in his courtroom, you were in contempt. Years ago, he'd sent a grieving mother to 30 days in county jail for disruptive sobbing at her son's manslaughter hearing. So, when Josh Preston, barely tall enough for the witness box, entered the courtroom, the room fell into a stunned, reverent silence. Cameras stopped clicking. Pens froze mid-sentence. Even the defense attorney, a seasoned, broad-shouldered man named Lyle Morgan, leaned back and gave Josh a solemn nod as if to say, "You really want to do this, kid?" Josh didn't answer with words. He kept walking, his sneakers whispering against the polished wood floor, the leash of his dog held with steady fingers. Max padded beside him, tall, commanding, his ears erect, his eyes sweeping the room like radar. The dog's vest was bright red, stitched in bold letters, Certified Medical Response and Alert Companion. Beneath that, Do Not Distract, protected under federal law. The moment they reached the front of the courtroom, Josh didn't wait for anyone to lift him onto the stand. He climbed up himself, settled onto the worn leather cushion, and placed both palms on the polished oak ledge in front of him. Max sat at his feet, posture flawless, not a muscle twitching. The judge glanced down over his glasses. "Is this the emotional support animal?" he muttered. Josh looked up. "He's more than that, Your Honor." "Oh?" Garrison arched a brow, pen in hand. "And what exactly is he?" Josh didn't flinch. "He's the only reason I'm still alive." That silenced even the prosecution. For a moment, there was only the faint hum of the overhead lights and the shuffling of paper from the stenographer. "Proceed," Garrison said stiffly, motioning to the assistant district attorney, Evelyn Brooks, a woman with a sharp jaw and a clipped tone. She rose, smoothing her navy blazer. "Josh, do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, ma'am," Josh said. His voice was calm, almost eerily calm for a child. "I saw what happened in the parking lot. You believe your father didn't assault Officer Trellman?" "I don't believe it. I know it." Brooks glanced at the judge, then approached the stand. "Can you describe what you saw?" Josh opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Max froze. It happened so fast and yet so slowly. One moment, the dog was sitting still. The next, his ears shot forward, his muscles locked, his nose lifted slightly as if sniffing the air for danger. Then a soundless growl, deep and vibrating like a low drum roll, rumbled from his chest. Josh's head jerked. He recognized the sound immediately. It was Max's alert growl. A signal he had only heard twice before in his life. Once, during a school lockdown drill when a real threat had turned out to be a janitor with a key ring. And once the night his mother died, when Max had yanked him from the path of a drunk driver's swerving car. He didn't hesitate. Josh turned slightly and whispered one word under his breath. "Duck," and then Max launched. The movement was a blur, a streak of fur and muscle and red vest arcing through the air, and in the next breath, pop. A sound that didn't belong in a courtroom. A dry, muffled crack, like a firework under a pillow. Screams ripped through the silence. The bullet hit Max mid-leap. His body twisted, but he still made it, shielding Josh, slamming into the boy's chest, knocking him backwards off the stand as the shot echoed. Chaos exploded. Court officers reached for weapons. The gallery scattered. A woman dropped her purse and screamed. A camera crashed to the floor, lens shattering. 2 deputies tackled the shooter, an older man in a faded brown uniform that almost passed for a bailiff's outfit. Almost, if you weren't paying attention. But Judge Garrison was. He was paying attention. And when his eyes met the shooter's face, pale, sweat-drenched, desperate, he didn't look surprised. He looked terrified, as if he had just seen a ghost, as if he recognized the man, and as if he knew exactly why he was here. "Get him out of my courtroom," the judge bellowed. But his voice cracked halfway through, not from anger, from fear. Max whimpered, low and painful. Josh, protected under the dog's weight, was conscious but stunned, his eyes wide with the kind of shock that doesn't scream or cry, it just stares. Medical responders rushed in. They loaded Max onto a gurney, the dog barely moving, blood soaking the side of his vest. Josh tried to follow, but his legs buckled. A female bailiff caught him before he hit the ground. "Stay still, sweetie. You're okay. You're okay." But he wasn't. Nothing was okay. Because this wasn't just a random act of violence. This wasn't a courtroom outburst or some tragic accident. Josh didn't know how, but deep down he understood. Someone hadn't wanted him to speak, and Max, his guardian, his shadow, his protector, had known it before anyone else. And the judge, the man who ruled this courtroom with a gavel like thunder, he wasn't just surprised, he was hiding something. The courtroom had never emptied so quickly in its history. It took less than 5 minutes for the gallery to clear. Judges, clerks, lawyers, interns, journalists. Some ran. Some were frozen. Others looked over their shoulders, too stunned to process what they'd just witnessed. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air like a ghost. The echoes of that single muffled shot clung to the mahogany paneling. One of the courtroom cameras was still rolling, its blinking red light the only movement in the vacated room. Max had been wheeled out under a blanket soaked in his own blood, his red service vest half torn. Josh tried to follow, tears streaking his cheeks in stunned silence, but 2 officers stopped him. "Son, we have to keep you safe." Safe. That word felt like a joke. Max had been his shield, his alarm system, his literal heartbeat. Josh had lived through panic attacks that made him think the floor was collapsing under his feet, but nothing prepared him for the moment he saw his best friend take a bullet meant for him. And across the courtroom, Judge Harold Garrison sat slumped in his chair, not ruling, not demanding order, just frozen. His lips had gone dry, the pink flushed from his cheeks. The color seemed to drain from his entire body, like ink spilled on parchment, spreading down his throat and into the heavy robes hanging from his frame. Eventually, a bailiff approached him. "Judge?" Garrison didn't answer. He stood slowly, motioned for the court to clear, then disappeared into his chambers, closing the door so softly it seemed unreal. 2 hours passed. No one saw him. Not his clerk, not the press, not even the Chief Justice who sent 3 messages asking for a statement. Inside those chambers, Garrison stood at his liquor cabinet, staring at a decanter of scotch he hadn't touched in 17 years. He reached for it, paused, then let his hand drop. His fingers trembled as he removed his robe and hung it carefully over the back of his leather chair, like a flag being lowered after a surrender. His reflection in the mirror above his fireplace looked 30 years older. He studied the lines on his face like a crime scene, the cracks near the eyes, the shadows below the cheekbones, the way his mouth trembled, not from grief, but from recognition. He knew that man, the shooter. Name, Douglas Penner. Age, 62. Former employment, corrections officer at Fairbanks State Penitentiary. Discharged, 1998. Reason, undisclosed. But Garrison remembered. He remembered everything. And the worst part was, Penner didn't just show up randomly. Someone had sent him. Someone who knew that Josh Preston was more dangerous than anyone else in that courtroom. Because the boy hadn't just witnessed something. He knew something. And worse, his dog had seen it too. The knock on his door jolted him like a gunshot. He snapped out of his trance and pulled his robe back on, tying it sloppily. "Come in," he croaked. The door creaked open. Assistant DA Melissa Ford stepped in, closing it behind her. Sharp-eyed and methodical, she was the rising star of the office. A woman known for quoting case law from memory and filleting defense witnesses with surgical precision. But today, even she looked shaken. "Sir," she began, "I just got back from the hospital. The dog's alive." Garrison exhaled, but it was shallow. And the boy, physically unharmed, psychologically, I don't know. She paused. "He's not talking much, but he keeps asking for the surveillance footage again." Garrison's eyes flicked toward her. "What footage?" "The parking lot footage. The one the state already submitted, but he claims there's more." "There isn't," Garrison said instantly. Too fast. Ford squinted. "Is that official knowledge, or just convenient?" He didn't answer, just walked over to his desk, hands behind his back like a tired professor. Then, in a low voice that barely resembled his usual commanding tone, he murmured, "That shooter, the one posing as a bailiff, he used to work in corrections." Ford frowned. "Where?" "Fairbanks." She blinked. "That place has been shut down for nearly 20 years. I know." "Then what the hell was he doing here dressed as a bailiff?" Garrison turned slowly to face her. His mouth opened as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Ford leaned in. "Judge, was he working alone?" "I don't know." It wasn't the truth, but it was the safest lie he could manage. She narrowed her eyes. "Was he after the boy?" Silence. Garrison rubbed his temples. "I should recuse myself from this case." Ford stiffened. That was not the kind of declaration she expected. "With respect, sir," she said carefully, "if you do that now, it'll raise questions. You've already presided over all the pretrial motions, the arraignment, the evidentiary rulings. I know. There's going to be a media firestorm, and if you suddenly walk away—" "I know," he snapped. The silence between them sharpened. Ford took a slow breath, then tried a different angle. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Garrison turned to the window. The city beyond was gray and wet, the clouds sagging low like the breath of something ancient. He touched the cold glass with 2 fingers, watching the fog from his skin mark the pain. "There are things that happened before you were born," he said softly. "Deals, decisions, mistakes, ones you don't just leave behind." "And now they're crawling out of the past?" Ford asked. Garrison didn't move. "You could say that." She stepped closer. "Then let me help you. If there's a conspiracy forming around this boy and his father, if Penner was sent by someone, we need to know who." The judge's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the windowsill. "That boy was never supposed to testify," he muttered. Ford blinked. "Excuse me?" He turned, looking her square in the eyes. "None of this was supposed to happen. Not the trial, not the shooting, not the dog. For a brief moment, Ford saw something behind Garrison's eyes she had never seen before. Fear. Not courtroom anxiety. Not legal caution. Real fear. The kind you bury for decades and pray never resurfaces. Then it hit her. You've seen Penner before. He didn't deny it. Ford took a step back. Then you can't recuse yourself now. Not because it's too late, because you're compromised. If you were connected to this man in any way, Garrison shook his head slowly. No, you don't understand. If I step off that bench, if someone else takes this case, they'll start pulling at the threads. The press, the defense, your office. They'll start asking questions, following names, dates, trial records, testimonies, rulings. His voice dropped to a whisper. And if they do that, they'll pull the whole thing apart. Ford's expression hardened. And what's the whole thing, Judge? He didn't answer, just sat down heavily in his chair and looked away. Melissa Ford left his chambers without another word. But as the door clicked shut behind her, her mind was already racing. Not with courtroom strategy or legal doctrine, but with something far simpler. If a boy and his dog could rattle Judge Harold Garrison to his bones, what exactly were they about to uncover? Josh didn't cry when Max was hit. He didn't scream, didn't panic, didn't ask why. He just stood there, fists clenched at his sides, the heat of Max's blood still damp on his hoodie, watching as EMTs wheeled his best friend, his lifeline, toward the trauma bay. "Hang in there, Max," he whispered under his breath, too soft for anyone else to hear. The gurney rattled slightly as they turned a corner. Josh followed until a nurse stopped him at the doors of surgery. "Sweetheart, you can't come in here." Josh's hand stayed on the steel railing of the gurney. He looked up, eyes clear but utterly still. "He doesn't like to be alone." The nurse gave a sympathetic smile, the kind adults offer children when they're trying to shield them from something irreversible. "He's a tough one, huh?" Josh nodded. "He's been through worse." Then a pause, a breath, a fragment of memory. "He's been with me since I was 5, since the night Mom died." That's when the nurse froze. Josh didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The scar tissue around that statement said enough. She gently touched his shoulder, then motioned to a waiting room. "You can sit just over there. I'll make sure you're the first to know when he's out." He nodded again and walked without looking back. The waiting room was too bright, sterile. Everything smelled like lemon and chlorine and something behind it all. Fear, maybe. Fear had a scent Josh knew. It was in the rubber of gloves, the antiseptic gel, the air itself. He sat on a stiff vinyl couch under a TV mounted in the corner. The news was already on. Of course it was. The chyron read, "Courtroom shooting interrupts child testimony. Service dog injured while saving boy." They showed the footage of Max leaping, over and over, a blur of red and fur and courage, then a replay of Josh being pulled from under him by first responders. They cut to anchors. A miracle dog, hero of the courtroom. Untrained bravery, Josh scoffed. Untrained, they had no idea. He pulled up his sleeve and looked at the little white scar on his forearm. A thin crescent, barely noticeable now, but permanent. Max had given him that scar once, not in anger, in protection. It was the night of his mother's funeral. The house had been packed with casseroles, stiff hugs, and people who didn't know what to say to a grieving 5-year-old. His dad had tried to be strong, but his eyes looked like hollow caves every time he looked at the empty kitchen chair where Mom used to drink her coffee. Josh had run into the backyard when the whispers became too loud. When someone asked, "Do you think Michael can really raise him alone?" He'd started to climb the fence. Not to run, not exactly. He just wanted quiet. But the second his foot went up on the post, Max, just a lanky rescue pup then, had launched. His teeth grabbed Josh's hoodie and yanked him back so hard he'd hit the ground. A nail from the fence caught his forearm. Blood everywhere. But the fence had been old. Rotten wood and twisted nails. And behind it, a pit bull 2 houses over had just broken its chain. If Josh had made it over, he wouldn't have come back. From that moment on, Max never left his side. The trainers had said Max was hyper-reactive to danger cues. His therapist said he was a living emotional radar. The dog learned how to read Josh's breath, his pupils, even his silence. "He's like a living panic button," Josh once said. Except he doesn't wait for the button to be pushed. Dr. Halber, his trauma therapist, had looked at him then with curiosity. "Do you think he can read people's intentions?" Josh had nodded. "I don't think, I know." He watched the screen now as reporters debated whether Max had sensed the danger or simply reacted to the sound of a gun. But Josh had felt it. He'd seen Max freeze just before it happened, not when the shot rang out. Before. Seconds before. His body went rigid. His ears twitched like radio antennae tuning into something no one else could hear. And Josh had whispered, "Duck." He didn't know why. He just trusted the feeling. Trusted Max. And Max had moved like a bullet. Officer Briggs, one of the court deputies, stepped into the waiting room carrying a paper cup of hot cocoa. He looked out of place, still in full tactical vest, badge glinting in the light. He sat down next to Josh and offered the cup. "Extra marshmallows," he said. "Got the nurse to sneak some in." Josh took it, but didn't drink. Briggs hesitated, then said, "You did good, kid. Real good. The way you kept your head, most grown men would have lost it." Josh didn't respond. Briggs cleared his throat. "The guy who shot Max, we're digging into his background, fake credentials, fake ID. Whoever set this up, it wasn't just some crazy." Josh finally looked at him. He wasn't aiming at me. Briggs blinked. "What do you mean?" "He wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to shut me up." Briggs looked unsettled. "You're saying this was, what, a hit?" Josh just sipped his cocoa. Not a hit, a warning. In the hallway outside, Melissa Ford stood with Dr. Halber, her arms crossed. "You really think he's right?" Melissa asked. "That this wasn't a random act?" Dr. Halber nodded. "I think Max saved him from more than a bullet." "Like what?" "Like the same silence that took his mom." Melissa frowned. "What do you mean?" Dr. Halber sighed. Josh's mom, Evelyn Preston, was a whistleblower. She worked in internal affairs, dug up dirt on police corruption. She was working a big case the week she died. Wait. Melissa froze. "You're saying this ties back to that?" "I'm saying," Halber replied quietly, "that boy saw something. And someone out there is still scared of what he remembers." Melissa swallowed hard. "So this isn't about the father?" "No," Halber said. "It's about the kid." Later that evening, the surgeon emerged. Josh stood before anyone could say a word. "He's stable," the doctor said. "We removed the bullet. It clipped the side of his rib cage, missed the lung by less than half an inch. He's going to need rest, but he's going to make it." Josh didn't breathe for 3 full seconds. Then the tears came. Not loud, not shaking, just quiet, slow, and raw. He walked to the recovery window where Max lay, hooked to fluids, his chest rising and falling gently. Josh placed a hand on the glass. and for the first time in hours, he smiled. The next day, the headline screamed, "Miracle Dog Saves Child in Courtroom Shooting. Jury's Hearts Stolen by Brave Shepherd. Fur and Fury, How Max Stopped a Murder." But Josh just sat quietly with the television muted, watching the images. He pointed at the screen and whispered, "That man didn't come to kill me." He looked back at Max, asleep beside him. He came to silence what I saw. It arrived in silence. No knock, no signature, no courier vehicle waiting at the curb. Just a plain, manila envelope slipped through the mail slot of the defense attorney's private office door at 6:17 a.m. Lyle Morgan almost didn't see it. He had arrived early that morning, like he always did before a trial day. The city was still waking up, its cold light creeping down the courthouse walls like spilled milk. He was holding a cup of black coffee, his coat still on, when he nearly stepped on the envelope sitting like an accusation in the middle of the carpet. There was no name, no return address, just a single USB drive inside. On its side, in small block letters, someone had printed, "Tuesday, Lot C." Morgan stared at it, heart thudding. He didn't touch it for a full minute. Then, slowly, he closed his door, pulled the blinds, and inserted the drive into his encrypted laptop. The screen flickered to life, one video file, titled 0412 Backup Cam C, timestamp 7:46 p.m. The exact moment the original video from the school board parking lot had malfunctioned, the state's evidence, the broken link in the chain. He clicked play. The footage was grainy but clear, angled from a utility pole behind the board office. It captured the parking lot in full, the lampposts, the cars, the figures moving like shadows beneath sodium lights. There they were, Michael Preston and Officer Trellman. In the state's submitted footage, the clip had cut out right before the confrontation. The official claim was a technical failure. Corrupted recording segment due to lightning interference. No follow-up, no audit. But this clip showed everything. Trellman standing 10 feet away, shouting something indistinct. Michael backing away, palms open. Then, Trellman stumbles backward. Not because he was pushed. He fakes it. He throws his arms up and staggers, almost theatrically like a bad stage actor pretending to be hit. Then, after a 1-second pause, he lunges at Michael Preston, grabbing him, twisting his arm, shoving him hard against the hood of a nearby car. And then the recording ends. Lyle Morgan didn't blink, didn't exhale. He just stared, because what he had just seen wasn't a confrontation. It was a setup. Within the hour, Morgan was in a secure meeting room in the courthouse basement, showing the footage to Melissa Ford. They sat on opposite sides of the steel table as the video played again and again. "No," she murmured the first time. "Wait," the second. And by the third, she was gripping the table edge so tightly her knuckles were pale. "This is real?" she asked finally. "I ran a full hash verification. It's authentic. Undeclared backup footage, not state-logged. Likely from an auxiliary recording node." Melissa shook her head. "I don't understand. There was no backup. The state said the board only had 2 cameras. Lyle leaned back, his voice ice. "They lied." Melissa exhaled, then leaned forward. "Where did you get this?" He hesitated. "It was delivered." "By who?" "I don't know. You have to report this to the court." "I will." She paused. "Do you think Trellman knew this footage existed?" Lyle nodded slowly. "That's why someone tried to kill the kid." Meanwhile, in another office on the top floor of the courthouse, Judge Garrison stood with his back to the window, reading a sealed memo in his trembling hands. The memo had been handed to him by a courier from internal security. It had a court seal and a single line of contents. Unregistered surveillance feed, school board lot C0412. His pulse thundered behind his eyes. He didn't need to open the attached USB. He already knew what it showed. He knew, because he had authorized the destruction of the original backup drive almost 2 weeks ago. Or so he thought. And now it was back. Later that day, the courtroom was full again, but colder. The air was different. Tense. Suspicious. Like the walls themselves were waiting for someone to scream. Michael Preston sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes darting nervously. Josh wasn't there. He was still under protective watch with Dr. Halber and a newly assigned marshal. Max had survived surgery. His condition was stable, but he wasn't walking yet. His vest, bullet-holed and blood-stained, now sat in a plastic evidence bag on the judge's desk. Lyle stood to address the court. "Your Honor, the defense has received newly discovered material evidence." Judge Garrison blinked. "From where?" "A source who wishes to remain anonymous." Garrison's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes darkened. Lyle continued. "It is surveillance footage from a third camera, one not submitted into state evidence." Murmurs surged across the courtroom. The prosecution team froze. Melissa Ford didn't look shocked. She looked furious. She stood. "Your Honor, we request an immediate authentication of the material and an evidentiary review in chambers." Garrison exhaled sharply. "So ordered." The courtroom cleared for recess. Lyle and Melissa followed Garrison into chambers. Behind closed doors, the video was played. 3 sets of eyes watched, and when it ended, no one said a word for 30 seconds. Then Garrison spoke. "Where was this hidden?" "I don't know," Lyle said. "You're asking this court to believe that a mystery video containing damning evidence just landed in your mailbox out of nowhere?" "I'm not asking the court to believe anything. I'm asking it to see." Garrison's jaw clenched. "This changes the narrative of the entire assault." "It doesn't just change it," Melissa added coldly. "It reverses it." Lyle looked at them both. Officer Trellman attacked Michael Preston, unprovoked. The footage shows fabrication, deceit. The assault was staged, and someone went to extreme lengths to hide it. Garrison didn't speak. Because he couldn't. Because in that moment, one horrifying realization bled into his bones. Someone had saved that footage. Someone had waited. And now, they'd chosen the perfect moment to release it. That night, Garrison didn't go home. He sat in his chambers long after the courthouse lights had dimmed, the echo of the footage playing again and again in his mind like a confession. On his desk was a torn envelope, no return address. Its contents were empty, just a sticky note taped to the flap. 5 words, written in block print. "Some things don't stay buried." Melissa Ford didn't sleep that night. Not because she couldn't, because she wouldn't. She sat alone in the archive room of the district attorney's office, 4 floors below street level, behind a keypad-locked steel door, surrounded by rows of rusted filing cabinets and dim industrial lights that flickered like dying fireflies. The building was silent, except for the humming of old servers and the occasional thump of pipes. It felt less like an office and more like the bones of the city, buried and forgotten. She had poured herself the strongest coffee she could find and opened every personnel folder connected to Officer Trellman. At first glance, his record was pristine. Not just clean, spotless. Commendations, letters of praise, a near-perfect fitness record, and regular promotions. No suspensions, no write-ups. Too clean, as if it had been laundered. Melissa had seen enough real records to know what absence really meant. Police files were never this quiet unless someone wanted them that way. She dug deeper, past the official transcripts into the shadow folders. Shadow folders were unofficial, unindexed collections of complaint material, usually notes or internal flags stored by individual precincts but never filed into the system. A holdover from the days when officers protected each other more than they protected the law. Using an override keycard meant for internal affairs, Melissa accessed the archives for Precinct 9B, the one where Trellman had worked 5 years prior. And there it was, a file labeled Use of Force, Excessive, Internal Hold Only Sealed, Password Protected. She cracked the encryption using a backdoor tool passed quietly through the prosecutor's network. A favor from a friend who owed her one after a corruption case 2 years ago. The file opened. Melissa's eyes scanned the page. Complainant: Devin Lee, 16 years old. Incident: use of excessive force during non-arrest interaction. Details: head trauma, ruptured eardrum, partial hearing loss in left ear. Officer Ryan Trellman. Outcome: no disciplinary action. Note: complainant's legal guardian retained attorney Michael Preston. Status: closed. No further inquiry. She reread that last line twice. Michael Preston, Josh's father, the accused in the current case. Suddenly, the entire puzzle shifted. This wasn't just about the courtroom, or Josh, or even Max. It went way back. Melissa printed the file and laid it flat on the metal table. Her hands trembled as she highlighted the timestamp and the name Preston. She remembered something from earlier in the trial, the way Trellman had looked at Michael, not with fear, but with something older, colder, the kind of contempt that grows like mold after a long time in the dark. She dug deeper. Old emails, internal messages, pay stubs. She requested old duty logs from the state records server and cross-checked them with badge access history. At 3:17 a.m., she found it. The night before the courtroom shooting, Officer Trellman had used a private badge code to access a closed evidence locker in the precinct's basement. The footage logs showed no surveillance of that room, claimed the cameras were down for maintenance. But she pulled the timestamp anyway. 37 minutes, unaccounted for. Exactly the kind of time someone would need to pass a weapon to someone off record. Melissa sat back, her spine aching from hours of leaning forward. She had gone looking for a motive. Now she had motive, means, and history. This wasn't just a bad cop. This was a calculated act of revenge. Trevor Trellman hadn't snapped. He had waited. Waited for the moment when Michael Preston was vulnerable. When public opinion was already against him. When the boy, the only one who saw the truth, could be taken out without anyone asking why. And now it all made sense. Why the surveillance footage had disappeared. Why the court had tried to silence Josh. Why Max had leapt before anyone saw the danger. This wasn't random. This was personal. This was retribution. She didn't go home. She went to see Michael Preston. It was just after 4 a.m. when she arrived at the holding center. The guard on duty, a sleepy-eyed man in his 50s, recognized her ID and buzzed her through without a word. Michael sat in the small interview room, his face drawn, his knuckles red from pressing into his palms. When she walked in, he didn't speak. He just looked at her like someone expecting to be told he'd lost everything again. Melissa placed the file on the table. His eyes scanned the front page and froze. "I tried to forget," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. "Devin Lee," Melissa said softly. "Your client. He was just a kid, a good one, caught in the wrong place, wrong time. Trellman slammed him into a wall for mouthing off, burst his eardrum." You filed the complaint. Michael nodded. Didn't matter. They buried it, like they always do. Except Trellman didn't forget, she said. Michael looked down. No, he never forgot. Melissa leaned forward. He waited. He watched you. And when you spoke at the school board meeting, when you called for better student protection after that incident with the lockers and patrol checks, he saw his chance. Michael closed his eyes. He baited you, Melissa continued, provoked you, lied in his report, forced the footage to disappear. Then, he sent someone to shut your son up. Michael's breath hitched. Melissa waited a moment, then said quietly, "This goes way deeper than we thought." He looked up at her. "I've never feared for Josh like this, not even when his mother died." Melissa frowned. "Evelyn?" "She was investigating something," he said, barely able to form the words. "Internal affairs. Something involving an old judge. She never told me who, but she said it went all the way to the courts." Melissa stiffened. "What year was that?" 2017. Her blood ran cold. That was the year Judge Harold Garrison was appointed to a lifetime seat on the state's highest criminal bench. The dots were forming fast now. Trellman, the attack, the cover-up, Garrison, Josh, Max, and the one truth no one had been ready to face. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a conspiracy. The basement was damp, windowless, and smelled faintly of rust and bleach. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead like flies trapped in glass tubes, casting a flickering white pallor over the concrete walls. In the far corner, near the janitor's closet and rusted vending machine, stood the last public payphone in the building, an obsolete relic wired into the foundation of a time before cell towers. It hadn't rung in months, not once, until now. It rang twice. Then it went silent. A janitor in a gray hoodie pushed his mop aside and stared at the phone like it had spoken in tongues. No one used it, no one touched it. It wasn't even supposed to work anymore. Then it rang again. Twice. The janitor hesitated, then walked over and lifted the receiver. He didn't say a word, just listened, then turned slowly and walked into the far corner of the shelter. There, seated alone under a single flickering bulb, was a man hunched over a chessboard with no opponent. His beard was streaked with gray. His coat, military surplus, was worn to threadbare patches. His eyes, though dimmed by time, had the kind of alertness that made people nervous. "Ellis," the janitor said quietly, "it's for you." The man didn't move for a full second. Then he stood, slow and deliberate, and took the phone. "Yeah?" he said, voice rough from silence. There was a pause, static. Then a voice rasped through the line, low, hoarse, urgent. "You saw the news?" Ellis froze. His mind ticked backward. He had seen the news. The boy. The dog. The courtroom, Max, the shot, the red vest. He clenched the phone tighter. "I saw. They said the dog jumped in front of the kid," the voice continued. Ellis closed his eyes. "He did." "Exactly," the voice said. "Now, imagine what he'll do in front of a jury." Click. The line went dead. Ellis stood there for a long time, holding the phone to his ear, listening to the nothing. 10 years ago, Ellis Green had walked out of Judge Garrison's courtroom in shackles. Convicted on a technicality. Denied retrial. Prosecutor suppressed evidence. Public defender too green to fight it. They'd found him guilty of possession with intent to distribute, a charge built entirely on circumstantial evidence and a single police report that conveniently omitted a body camera malfunction. He did 5 years in state prison, lost his wife, lost custody of his daughter, lost everything except the fire burning inside him, and that fire had a name: Garrison. He didn't know why Garrison had gone after him. Maybe because he wouldn't accept a plea. Maybe because he filed a complaint against the arresting officer. Maybe just because he was easy to crush. But Ellis never forgot. Not when the prison guards mocked him. Not when he missed his daughter's 6th birthday. Not when he woke up in the middle of the night from the sound of screaming in solitary. He never forgot the gavel, the glare, the cold words, "You're a danger to your community, Mr. Green. I won't lose sleep putting you away." Now, a decade later, someone had called him out of the shadows. Someone who knew what Max had done in that courtroom. Someone who knew what that dog's testimony, his presence, could mean. Ellis hung up the phone and stared at his reflection in the smudged chrome. The same man who had once been crushed under the weight of a crooked courtroom was now being summoned by it. He went back to his cot, pulled out a duffel bag from underneath, and began packing. Not much. A change of clothes, a flash drive. A photo of his daughter, a folder labeled 1998, ruling dockets. A faded letter from a journalist who never finished her story. He zipped the bag and slung it over his shoulder. "Going somewhere?" the janitor asked quietly. Ellis nodded once. Back into the storm. As he stepped into the freezing wind outside the shelter, Ellis didn't head toward the bus station. He walked east, toward the courthouse. Each step echoed with memory. He remembered the floor tiles in the holding cell, the stale breath of the public defender, the cold rage in his chest as Garrison declared him guilty and moved on to the next case without blinking. He had kept quiet for 10 years, but he had always watched. He kept a file. Names, connections, quiet payments, campaign donations, transfer orders, evidence tampering. There were whispers of Garrison being involved in a correctional flow, a term used by insiders to describe a system in which specific judges worked with specific prosecutors and officers to guarantee convictions and feed the prison industry. But Ellis never had proof. Until now. Until that dog. Because Max had seen something no one else had. And someone had tried to kill him for it. Ellis didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in pressure, in secrets, in systems that eat people alive, and in the cracks that open when the right people say no more. At sunrise, he stood outside the courthouse steps, his coat pulled tight, eyes fixed on the rows of windows above. The courtroom looked different now, not because anything had physically changed, but because everything had. 4 days had passed since the shooting. 4 days since Max jumped in front of a bullet. 4 days since the mask began to crack on Judge Harold Garrison's carefully polished facade. When Josh Preston walked back into the courtroom that morning, he didn't look like a child who'd just survived an assassination attempt. He looked like a witness. Max walked beside him, limping slightly, his stitches visible through a specially tailored medical vest. His movement was slower, but no less dignified. Each step sounded louder in the tense silence, as if his pause were marking time. The gallery was packed, more reporters than usual, more people trying to find meaning in the boy and his dog. And at the bench, Judge Garrison didn't meet Josh's eyes. He simply gestured, almost mechanically, for the boy to take the stand again. Josh climbed the steps, his face pale but steady. Max settled at his feet with a low groan, then went still. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth?" Josh nodded. "I do." The court reporter adjusted her mic. Assistant DA Melissa Ford stood. Her tone was quiet, careful. She didn't want to lead him. She didn't need to. "Josh," she said, "can you tell the court what you saw that night in the parking lot?" Josh glanced down at Max, then up at the judge. Then at the jury. He didn't rush. "I saw Officer Trellman push my dad first. he said softly. There was a gasp, a ripple through the crowd like wind over a field. One of the jurors shifted visibly in their seat. A man in the gallery murmured, "What?" Judge Garrison rapped his gavel once. "Quiet." Melissa stepped closer. "You're sure?" "Yes," Josh said firmly now. "I was standing behind a car. I saw the whole thing." "What did your dad do?" Josh swallowed. "He didn't touch him. He just backed up." "And then?" Josh's eyes flickered. "I saw Trellman reach into his pocket. He pulled out a phone. He typed something. Then he looked up and lunged at my dad." Melissa frowned. "You're certain he texted someone?" "Yes. I saw his thumbs move like this." Josh mimed typing. "It wasn't a call. It was a message. Short, fast." Melissa glanced at the prosecution table. "Your Honor, we request a subpoena for Officer Trellman's phone records." Garrison hesitated. His fingers curled around the edge of the bench like a man clinging to the edge of a cliff. Then, with no other move left, he nodded once. "Granted." 2 hours later, a technician from the sheriff's digital forensics unit took the stand. He wore glasses, a beige shirt with a coffee stain on the sleeve, and the weary look of a man who had pulled an all-nighter combing through phone logs. He was sworn in and seated. Melissa stood again. "Detective Marsh, did you retrieve Officer Trellman's phone activity from the night in question?" "Yes, ma'am," Marsh said. "We recovered logs, app data, and a partial SIM dump." "And what did you find?" Marsh adjusted his glasses. "At exactly 7:46 p.m., Officer Trellman sent a text message to a number not listed in his contacts. Was that number associated with any known individual?" "No. It was a prepaid burner, but," he paused, "the model and serial range matched the exact make of the phone found on the man who attempted the shooting in this courtroom." Gasps again. Garrison gripped his gavel but didn't raise it this time. Melissa's voice was low now, dangerous. "What was the message?" Marsh cleared his throat. It read, "Confirmed. He's here. Ready when you are." Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Josh stared down at Max, whose head now rested on the floor like he knew the moment needed stillness. Melissa turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this evidence directly links Officer Trellman to the courtroom assailant. We request immediate suspension of his testimony and a full criminal investigation into his conduct." The courtroom exploded in noise. Reporters scrambled for phones. A woman sobbed audibly. The jurors sat stunned, processing what this meant. Judge Garrison's face was stone, but his hand trembled. He raised the gavel high and slammed it down. Bang! "Recess," he barked. Bang! "This court is in recess." Behind the scenes, Garrison moved fast. He stormed into his chambers, locked the door, and dropped heavily into his chair. His breathing was ragged. This wasn't just a threat to his authority. It was a threat to everything. The system he'd helped build, the rulings he'd passed, the people he'd shielded. And now, because of one child and one dog, it was all unraveling. He opened his drawer and stared at the old file folder inside. Ellis Green's name stared back at him. So did the initials EP on a sealed envelope beneath it. Evelyn Preston, Josh's mother. And just for a moment, Garrison whispered something to the air. "You were right, you always were." Then he stood, straightened his robe, and returned to the bench, because the fall of a giant never starts with a crash. It begins with a whisper. Back in the hallway outside the courtroom, Melissa knelt beside Josh, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did good," she said. "Really good." Josh nodded. "I didn't do anything. You told the truth." He looked at Max, whose tail thumped once. I just said what he would have. Inside, the jury sat pale-faced, and the gavel no longer sounded like power. It sounded like fear, because now the truth was crawling out from beneath the robe of the man who had buried it for years. And the boy who was never supposed to speak had just ignited the first spark of a reckoning. It was raining again when Ellis Green returned to the courthouse. The sky hung low and gray, as if the city itself knew what was about to happen. He wore a clean jacket, the same military surplus coat he'd had when he was arrested years ago, only now freshly pressed. His boots were worn but polished. His eyes were hollow, not from defeat, but from clarity, from the kind of resolve that comes only when you've lost everything, and finally see what's left to fight for. No one stopped him at the doors. No one recognized him. Not yet. He walked past the metal detectors, up the stone steps, down the hallway past the portraits of judges long dead. His steps were steady, his face unreadable. In his hand was a sealed manila folder. He entered the district attorney's office unannounced. Melissa Ford looked up from her desk and froze. He didn't speak. He simply walked forward, placed the envelope on her desk, and met her eyes. "This," he said softly, "is the rest of the story." Then he turned and left. Melissa stared at the envelope for a long time. Then she broke the seal. Inside were dozens of pages, some typed, some photocopied, some handwritten. Case transcripts, sworn affidavits, old court documents stamped with red ink and black redactions. But the redactions were gone now, whited out, cleaned. She flipped through them, her heart pounding. Each document was tied to one name, Judge Harold Garrison. And each one was damning. The first transcript detailed a plea bargain from 1996, one where the defense had presented exculpatory evidence, but Garrison had refused to allow it into the record. The defendant, a 19-year-old, had confessed under duress after 32 hours without counsel. The second, a ruling from 2001. Garrison had denied a motion to suppress evidence that was obtained illegally. The police officer involved had been reprimanded, but the ruling had stood. The third, a typed memo from an assistant prosecutor dated 2009. Garrison suggested we bury the tape, his words, not mine, claims it'll complicate the narrative. Melissa's hands began to tremble. Then came the fourth file, Ellis Green's case. It included the original ruling, the one that sent him away. But attached to it was a video still, a black and white screenshot. Exhibit 7B, surveillance footage, dismissed due to corruption. Only now it was intact, crystal clear. And it showed what Ellis had claimed all those years ago, that he had been outside the building before the alleged narcotics drop, that he wasn't even present when the exchange took place. The footage had been suppressed, not because it was damaged, but because Garrison had ordered it sealed. Melissa's vision blurred. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk. She stood, slowly, walked down the hall to the district attorney's private office, and knocked 3 times. By noon, an emergency assembly had been called in the courthouse. Attorneys flooded the hallway, cell phones buzzing, voices raised. Judges whispered in corners. Clerks ran with folders in hand. Reporters gathered outside, sensing blood in the water. Melissa stood before the press with the DA himself beside her, a silver-haired man known for his cautious temperament and meticulous preparation. Today, though, he looked like a man with a match in his hand and a gasoline-soaked building behind him. "This morning," he said into the microphone, "our office received new evidence implicating Judge Harold Garrison in a pattern of judicial misconduct spanning nearly 3 decades. The documents contain proof of knowingly suppressed evidence, coercion of plea deals, improper judicial influence, and a violation of constitutional rights in multiple rulings. Gasps, cameras clicked like machine guns. He paused. And as of 1 hour ago, Judge Garrison has been placed under formal investigation. He has been relieved of all judicial duties. A beat. He will be facing charges. Inside the courthouse, Garrison sat alone in the same room where, for decades, he had ruled with absolute authority. Only now, he was on the other side of the table, the defendant's side. He was still in his robe. He hadn't removed it. It hung around him like a relic or a shroud. He didn't speak when the agents walked in. He didn't move when the DA's office investigator read him his rights. Only when Melissa Ford entered, folder in hand, did he lift his head. Their eyes met. No anger, no yelling, just recognition of who she was now and of who he had been. "You should have seen it coming," Melissa said softly. Garrison smiled faintly. "I did, just not from a boy and a dog." She laid the folder down in front of him. "You buried too many truths," she said, "but this one refused to stay buried." He closed his eyes. They always do, eventually. An hour later, Garrison was formally charged. The court assigned a judge from another county, and for the first time in 30 years, Harold Holthaw to Harold Garrison sat in the defense chair, his name called not as Your Honor, but as the accused. And across the room, behind a pane of safety glass, a boy sat with his German shepherd. Max's stitches were healing. So was the truth. The deliberation lasted 46 minutes. 46 minutes to undo 3 months of courtroom tension, 4 days of live testimony, hours of cross-examinations, and a lifetime of fear. Michael Preston sat in the defendant's chair, eyes forward, fingers interlocked tightly over the polished wood of the defense table. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Not until the foreperson of the jury, a woman in her 60s wearing a faded church pin on her collar, stood and read the word, "Not guilty." He didn't react at first, not until he heard the sharp gasp from Melissa Ford behind him, followed by the soft cry of Josh in the gallery. Then it hit him like a wave. Michael's body sagged forward, not collapsing, releasing. Years of weight, of second-guessing, of wondering whether fighting back had been the right thing to do. He turned slowly to find Josh already standing. The boy's arms were outstretched, and Max, beside him, gave a single low woof, as if acknowledging the verdict himself. Officer Trellman wasn't in the room. He'd been arrested 3 hours earlier by internal affairs officers and federal marshals acting on charges of conspiracy to commit perjury, attempted witness tampering, and coordinated obstruction of justice. He was still in uniform when they cuffed him. Now he sat in an entirely different holding facility, his name stripped from the precinct records, his badge turned in, his gun locked in an evidence box bearing his own case number. He'd made no statement, but his silence spoke volumes. The shooter, the man who nearly took Josh's life, had been formally identified as Dwayne Cobb, a former correctional officer discharged from Fairbanks Penitentiary for unlawful use of force and patterns of intimidation. His personnel file had been buried, sanitized. But Melissa found it. He had worked closely with certain judges in a now defunct behavioral compliance unit. The implication was clear: intimidation by proxy. The worst-kept secret of old judicial systems. And now? Cobb faced federal charges of attempted murder, armed assault, identity fraud, and terroristic intimidation of a federal witness. His trial was already scheduled. And as for Judge Harold Garrison, his face was on every front page from Chicago Tribune to the New York Times. "The Fall of the Iron Gavel," one headline read. "Judge who ruled without mercy now faces justice," said another. His booking photo showed a man unshaven, hollow-eyed, still holding his chin high, but the confidence in his eyes had turned brittle, like a man trying to impersonate the person he used to be. He was no longer Your Honor. He was simply Harold Garrison, defendant. But none of that compared to what happened in the courtroom at the end of the trial, after the jury was dismissed. After Michael had hugged his son so tightly it looked like he might never let go. After Melissa stepped forward to formally withdraw all pending motions and close the trial docket. There was a moment, a pause, a stillness. The judge's bench, now occupied by an interim magistrate, stood empty as the room exhaled. Then Josh stepped forward. He didn't speak. He simply looked down at Max. The dog was limping but upright. A thin scar ran along his side, barely visible under the fresh navy vest that read, Trial Companion, Honorary Officer. Josh gave a small nod. Max walked. Slowly, every step measured. His paws padded softly over the hardwood. And then he turned, walked past the defense table, past the witness stand, and up to the judge's bench. He paused there, looked up, and sat. A long beat of silence. Then, a low, deep, deliberate bark. Not loud, not aggressive, but full of weight, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. And the room, every soul, every body, every voice, froze. It wasn't just symbolic. It wasn't just a gesture. It was recognition. Recognition of injustice, of survival, of the fact that this trial had only ever moved forward because this dog, a living witness, refused to let evil pass unnoticed. And then, slowly, applause. At first, a single clap from the gallery, then two, then an eruption. Not loud, but pure, cathartic. The kind of applause not meant for celebration, but for relief. Outside, reporters surged toward the steps, but the first to emerge was not Michael. It was Josh, still holding Max's leash. He paused under the tall columns of the courthouse, the sky now blue and washed clean by last night's rain. Microphones were shoved in his face. Josh, how does it feel? Josh, did you think this day would come? Josh, what do you say to the people who still don't believe? He looked down at Max, then back at the cameras, and simply said, He told the truth, then walked away. Melissa watched from a distance. She didn't speak to the press. Instead, she pulled out a small envelope from her coat pocket, the one Ellis Green had sent with the final transcripts. Inside was a photocopy of the first motion he ever filed on his own behalf from prison. It was scrawled in pencil, misaligned, filled with crossed-out lines and misspellings, but one sentence stood untouched. They won't believe me now, but they will one day, because truth waits. She folded the page, placed it back in the envelope, and whispered, They believe you now, Ellis. And in a courthouse that once silenced voices, a single bark had broken the silence forever. The auditorium was quiet in that reverent kind of way only a room full of people holding back tears can be. Rows of families sat shoulder to shoulder, grandparents, foster parents, single dads, tired moms. Children clung to their legs or sat in their laps, wide-eyed and watchful. And in the front row, behind a velvet rope, a dozen dogs sat obediently at the feet of their new handlers. All wore dark blue vests stitched with a single golden thread in the shape of a lightning bolt. The banner above the stage read, Courage K9, Inaugural Class Graduation Ceremony. Because some heroes walk on four legs. At center stage stood a wooden podium with two microphones, a blue sash draped neatly over the front. Behind it stood Josh Preston, now 12, taller, steadier, more confident. He wore a navy blazer, khakis, and the same blue sash slung across his chest. His fingers rested gently on the leash of the dog beside him. Max, still strong, still sharp, still watching, but a little grayer around the muzzle now. Josh took a breath and began. "When I was 5, he said, I lost my mom." There was no tremble in his voice, just clarity. "After that, I didn't talk much. I didn't feel safe. But there was one soul on earth that made me feel like I wasn't invisible. That I mattered. That I could be heard, even when I said nothing." He looked down at Max. "He saved me when I didn't know I needed saving. And 6 months ago, he saved me again, in a courtroom, in front of strangers. He didn't know what the rules were. He didn't care. He just knew something was wrong." He looked back out at the crowd. "And that's why we started Courage K9. Applause, real, raw, full of something that lives between admiration and awe." Josh smiled, took a step back, and nodded. Michael Preston walked onto the stage next. He wore no suit, just a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, a Courage K9 badge clipped to his belt. He was the program's director of operations now, a full-time position. But more than that, he was its heart. He shared the stats. 58 dogs placed, 36 kids reunited with family, 7 courtrooms now allowing canine witnesses as trauma support, 0 program dropouts. He spoke about healing, about second chances, and about the strange way pain can turn into purpose when people are brave enough to share it. "We don't just pair kids with dogs," he said. "We pair truth with courage, because the system will always be too big. But courage, when it's real, fits in any room." Melissa Ford came up after that. She looked different now. Not just more respected, though she was. Not just more confident, though she had every right to be. She looked lighter, the kind of lightness that comes from doing the hard thing and surviving it. She explained how the DA's office had formally introduced the Max Motion, a piece of policy legislation that enabled service animals to accompany minors during any legal process where trauma or intimidation could impair testimony. She pulled out a copy of the signed bill and held it up to applause. Then she smiled. "And yes," she said, "it's named after that Max." The room rose to its feet. Even Max did. In the corner of the stage, leaning quietly against the wall with his arms folded, stood Ellis Green. He didn't speak that night. He didn't have to. The newest batch of trainees had all come through his hands, rescued, trained, certified. He'd become a kind of legend in the dog-handling community, known for saying more with a nod than most people said with whole interviews. One of the new recruits, a rescued lab named Penny, nuzzled his boot gently. He gave her a small rub behind the ear and whispered, "You're ready." And she was. Because Ellis hadn't just taught the dogs, he'd taught himself. That the past doesn't get to decide the last page. Back in the auditorium, the lights dimmed slightly. A video began to play on the projection screen. Footage from inside the courtroom 6 months earlier, silent, respectful, edited for confidentiality, Josh taking the stand, Max sitting beside him, then the leap, the bark, the moment of truth. A voiceover played, Josh's voice. "Some people speak, some people listen, but some heroes don't need words at all. They just need someone brave enough to trust them." Fade to black, then white letters on the screen. Courage K9. Trust what can't be seen. The crowd applauded again. A standing ovation. After the ceremony, Josh sat on the edge of the stage, legs swinging gently over the side. Max curled beside him. A little girl approached, maybe 7, Big eyes, small frame, clutching a leash that led to a golden retriever still clumsily figuring out his pace. She looked nervous. Josh smiled. "You want to sit?" She nodded. He made room. She sat down, still holding the leash. "He listens to me," she said softly, "even when nobody else does." Josh nodded. "I know the feeling." She looked at him. "How do you know if he's going to protect you?" Josh smiled, reached down and rubbed Max's head. "You don't," he said. "You just believe. And one day, he'll show you." Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, Michael, Melissa, Ellis, and Josh sat together on a rooftop, watching the skyline fade into orange. Below them, 100 people gathered around food trucks, music, dogs playing in the grass. The world felt different. Not perfect, not fixed, but better. And sometimes that's more than enough. Josh leaned back in his chair, Max's head resting in his lap. The dog's eyes closed slowly, his breathing even. "Think he knows?" Michael asked quietly. Josh didn't look away. He always knew. A pause. Some heroes don't need words. He looked up at the stars. Sometimes all it takes is a signal no one else sees.